Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Shadowverse Evolve and Vanguard crossover Abysscraft review. In this, I'll go over all the Abysscraft cards and if they're, of relevance to the Abysscraft deck that is being built for it, or any other kind of maybe side options that the cards might be used for other crafts. Also, fair warning, I am not super well versed in Vanguard. I've only dabbled with the game, and I don't know the culture or memes or anything else really around the card. So bear with me if I either pronounce the names wrong in some way, shape, or form, or maybe I'm just off a little bit in other little aspects of the game. But before we get into the cards themselves, let's take a look at the review. So the review in this video there's basically no review, or at least a rating, I should say. Obviously, I'm going to be reviewing the cards. I meant rating, not review, but you know what I mean. There's no rating only because, all the cards are basically for one archetype. And so it's kind of, as long as you have the archetype in mind, it's kind of relatively easy to tell where the cards are meant to go in the archetype. But if they are not good, not even used in their own archetype because they're just kind of subpar, I will at least just mention that. Or if they're even just used in certain niche cases, I'll try to mention that as best as possible. But otherwise, this is also the two different leader cards for Ren Suzugamori, which I assume, plays Shadow Paladins. Again, I don't play the game, so I'm not totally well versed with the characters, but I'm assuming he plays them. So yeah, let's get into it. I'll also, we're going to start off early with a little bit of an explanation, but I'll get into all the mechanics in the Shadowverse version of the Vanguard effects. First off, we're starting off with the starter amulets for the deck. The one meant for Shadow Paladins is Full Bow, which is on the left side. It's a 2-cost amulet, but it stays on the board when you start the game, so it's not like it actually costs any play point. And it has the ability of act, engage it, and put it to the cemetery to put the top 2 cards of your deck into your cemetery, and it can only be activated if you have a Shadow Paladin follower on the field. In case that gives any kind of hint to what the deck does, it is basically a Necrocharge deck for Shadow Paladins. You get additional effects based on how many Shadow Paladin cards are in your cemetery. So, that's pretty straightforward. It's just kind of like a variation of Necrocharge. The reason why I threw Lizard Runner, Undo, and Stardust Trumpeter here is both of those are the starter deck starter amulets, which don't have any specificity as far as what Vanguard follower has to be on the board, just as long as there is a Vanguard follower. And it does give the nice buff of +1/+1 by sacrificing them. So some people I've seen run these instead of Full Bow, because they might prefer the +1/+1 to try to keep a follower alive a little bit better. So it's kind of up to you. But obviously there is just the downside of it doesn't count as a Shadow Paladin, so it won't count toward your, Shadow Paladin count in cemetery. The starter amulets do count towards your 40 card limit in the deck, so kind of keep that in mind. But yeah, otherwise there are other starter amulets, but all the other starter amulets that come in the main set, not the starter decks, because that's Undo and Trumpeter, but the main set, all of them in order to trigger actually requires their own attribute to be on the board to actually get rid of the starter amulet. So really effectively, yes, you could run other starter amulets, but really effectively you only have Full Bow, Undo, and Trumpeter as options for a Shadow Paladin deck. The other new mechanic in the crossover collab is the drive point / ride mechanic. They kind of are, interchangeable. And so we'll go over Witch of Nostrum, Aryan Road, just as an example of how the drive point and ride mechanic works. So Aryan Road is a 2-cost 2/2 that has the ride mechanic for 1 play point. And when you ride it, it gives the follower drive, and then on drive. So once you ride, you drive, and then on drive, you give the follower +1/+1. So she becomes a 3/3, and then you can discard a Shadow Paladin. If you do, you draw 2 cards. So, on the on drive effect, she gets the +1/+1, kind of like she's evolving. A lot of the evolve followers get +1/+1. And then, a lot of times they have, an additional effect other than the stats. So very similar to evolving. When you ride, the drive points are in your Evo deck. So you'll take it out of your Evo deck, you put it underneath the Witch of Nostrum Aryan Road, and she has drive. And when you drive, it's the mechanic of when you tap it to swing, you check the top card of your deck. If it has the trigger, if the card that you check has the trigger in the upper right, you get whatever additional benefit it is. We'll go over those triggers in a second. And if it does have a trigger, you may choose to activate it. You do not have to. But if you do decide to activate the trigger, you will put the card into the cemetery. But if you do not decide to use the trigger, or it is not a card with a trigger, you just put it to the bottom of your deck. So that's kind of that. It's very similar to like the race mechanic with Uma Musume. The riding does count towards your like once per Evo rule in the game. So you can't like ride a follower and then evolve a different follower on the same turn. That's just not allowed. And same thing with evolving. You can only use up to 1 Evo point when you ride. So the triggers are for Shadow Paladin. There are 4 of them. There's a crit trigger, a draw trigger, a stand trigger, and a heal trigger. Unlike Vanguard, one of the few things I know about Vanguard is you have to have 16 triggers in the deck, and that's usually like split into 4 different copies of 4 cards. But in the case of Vanguard in Shadowverse, you don't need 16 copies. You can have literally just whatever you feel like. I've noticed, at least with most decks, they tend to run the crit, draw, and heal triggers. And a lot of them do run the stand trigger, but, sometimes they only run 2, maybe 1, maybe none. So it's, more totally up to you. So basically, if Aryan Road swings and is, rode upon, you check the top card. If it's one of these 3, you get the bottom effect. So like the critical trigger down at the bottom. If it's checked with a drive check, you give a follower +2 attack. The draw one is you draw a card. The stand trigger is you stand a different follower, or you stand a follower on your field, but they can't attack enemy leaders. So it's kind of like a double attack where you could swing into another follower, but they're trying to curb the aggressiveness of stand triggers by not allowing you to attack the leaders. And then the heal trigger is you gain 3 life back. In all of these situations, once they're triggered and you resolve their effects, the card themselves goes to the cemetery. They don't go to hand. I know a lot of people are used to adding the cards to hand and whatnot from the card game, but it's one of those weird little habits you'll have to kind of, get used to not doing. But let's just go over the cards real quick, other than the trigger aspect of them. So Grim Reaper, starting from the left, Grim Reaper is a 2-cost 3/2 that if you have at least 10 Shadow Paladin cards in the cemetery, he has Storm. So, good aggressive card to try to bring the opponent down to 0. Abyss Freezer is a 2-cost 3/2 that on summon, you discard a Shadow Paladin, you put a Shadow Paladin from your cemetery into your hand. So a little bit of nice recursion if you kind of need, if you have like a weenie that you want to get rid of, then you want to get like one of the bigger game finisher cards. Darkside Trumpeter, it's a 1-cost 2/2 that at the start of the end phase, if you have at least 10 Shadow Paladins in the cemetery, you select the Shadow Paladin and refresh it, which basically means you stand it back up, which doesn't sound like a big deal, but sometimes the only way that a follower might be able to be killed by the opponent is by just swinging at it with a card with Rush. So the fact that, you can stand it, it's at least one less form of way to potentially remove a follower. And then Abyss Healer is a 2-cost 2/3 with Ward. And on Fanfare, if you have at least 10 Shadow Paladins in the cemetery, you give your leader 3 defense. So you can kind of see they're all their effects in some way, shape, or form also are relatively similar to their trigger. And you can, they're certainly just good playable cards on their own, during the game, even if they're not hit by a trigger. So the next card, now that we've gone through all the mechanics of the game, we'll start to kind of go through more of the cards and just kind of talk about what they do. So the first one is a spell called Garurubao. One weird thing that kind of throws me off is all the spells seem like they actually might be followers, but they're spells for some reason. I'm not sure if there's a reason for it or a method to the madness. But Garurubao is a 4-cost spell with Quick, and it says select up to 1 enemy follower on the field and 1 Shadow Paladin follower in your cemetery. You can destroy the first follower, the enemy follower you chose, and then the second card you chose in your cemetery, you add it back to your hand. Keep in mind, both are up to 1, so even if you just want to play this just to get a follower back into your hand that you really want, you could just say, I play it, I select up to 0 followers on the opponent's field, if they don't have any, and I'm just going to grab this card from the cemetery. And likewise, if somehow, I'd be amazed, but if somehow you had nothing in cemetery and you played this with 4 play points, you're probably having a really bad game. But second off, you could still at least just choose an enemy follower to destroy for 4. This one is seems to be less used than a lot of the other cards, so surprisingly enough, pretty early on, here's one of the more mediocre ones. But I could certainly at least see running 1 or 2, depending on if you need more consistency for the deck. But it seems like the deck, as you'll see shortly, is pretty consistent enough that I can see why people don't run Garuru Bow. The next spell is Dark Shield Mac Lear. It is a 1-cost spell that quick. You can choose one of the following. You can select an enemy follower on the field and deal 2 damage, or you can discard a Shadow Paladin, select an enemy follower on the field, deal it 3, and then you mill the top card of your deck into your cemetery. So first off, it's an Angelic Sniper reprint that is specific to Abysscraft, so that's kind of weird and interesting and cool. But mainly, unless you have literally no cards in hand and you play Macular, you're probably going to want to use the second effect of discarding a Shadow Paladin to deal 3 and mill 1. Maybe depending on if your hand's really good, you just don't even want to discard anything. Sure, maybe you just snipe something for 2. But not a bad card. I've seen a few decks with it, so it's certainly played from time to time. Next up is Blaster Javelin. He's a 2-cost 3/2 that has rush, so you can just kind of swing into a tapped follower when you play him. And on Fanfare, you can discard a Vanguard card and search your deck for a Phantom Blaster Dragon or Blaster Dark, reveal it and add it to your hand, and then shuffle your deck. So just a good consistency card. I would imagine every deck would run 3. I can't imagine why not. And then at least has a little bit of board control with you being able to rush it into an enemy follower for 3. So overall, 10 out of 10 card. Run the card. Next up is Doran Bow. He's a 1-cost 2/2 that while you have 10 Shadow Paladin cards in the cemetery, he has Bane. And then if he's on the field, whenever a follower on the field performs drive check, you put the top card of your deck into your cemetery. So it just helps I'm probably going to say Necrocharge for a lot of these, but Shadow Paladin count in cemetery. This card seemed, just looking at it, the card seemed very mediocre. The Bane, I guess, isn't bad, but on a 1/2/2 that can't attack on the turn it's summoned, it's kind of the opponent could kind of ignore it. I mean, I guess you could play a little bit of Mind Games, because this does kind of remind me of Old Man and Old Woman back from set 1 in Swordcraft. And that was a little bit of a mind game card. But otherwise, I mean, there's enough discarding and mill in the deck that even with the mill from drive check, it just seems not super helpful, or it seems almost excessive, the amount of milling. I mean, almost every card in here is going to be able to mill or discard in some way, shape, or form. So it's such a mediocre 1-cost when there's already, Mac Lear, and there's another 1-cost we'll get to in a second that's just is better overall for the deck. Black Sage Karen is the 1-cost I was just mentioning a second ago with Doran Bow. He's a 1-cost 2/2 that on Fanfare you mill the top 2 cards of your deck. So why run Doran Bow when this literally gets you not only an extra mill, but you don't even need a requirement of needing some follower to drive check. So just run this instead. I guess you could argue the Bane on Doran Bow, but I don't know, who cares? There's enough other ways to just deal damage and deal with threats in the game that is just Bane on a 1-cost 2/2 is just whatever. But anyways, one other nice thing with Karen, though, is he is good for Necrocharge based decks outside of Vanguard. Just an easy 1-cost 2/2. He could probably play this with Poltergeist and, just have more consistent options to get the mill going early on in the game. It's also the first good 1-cost 2/2 without basically any downside, Silverbolt Hunter. So that's kind of interesting and cool. I guess if you want to play a more early game aggression deck, you could always run Karen. What was the other deck? I could see this being run in control-based deck, the traditional control deck of running some Necrocharge with Rule and I, the old Yin Setsu Rule and I Kawi deck. I could see this being run to help get the Necrocharge 10 faster for things like Rule and I. So I could definitely see this being used in other ways other than just Vanguard. Up next is Knight of Darkness Rugos. He's a 2-cost 2/2 follower that you can ride for 1. And on drive, you select one enemy follower in the field, deal it 2 damage, give him +1/+1, and put the top card of your deck into your cemetery. One interesting thing to know about him is unless you can select an enemy follower to deal the 2 damage to, he doesn't get the +1/+1 or the mill. He's very similar to Dublame Duke and Dame. Where Dublame's a 2-cost 2/2 that on Fanfare he just mills 1, and then you evolve for 1, and he can deal 2 to a follower. Or if you have Necrocharge 10, you can deal 4 instead. So Rugos is very similar. If you are kind of looking for like a side grade, to Dublame Duke and Dame, where it's like you just kind of want effectively like 6 copies of Dublame, but one set is kind of like a little less good compared to the original Dublame. You could run Rugos. I could certainly see an argument for him as well in like 2 costs because he has a 2-cost follower, and Necrocharge because of the mill. So you might be able to. You might even be like a more budget option. I'm not sure what Dublame's prices are right now, but if you want something that's very close and you're just kind of short on cash, you might be able to scoop by with a Rugos. In the meantime. So yeah, certainly very good in Shadow Paladins, but also might have some application outside of the deck as well. Next is Cursed Lancer. He's a 5-cost 5/5 that has an effect that says at the start of your end phase, select an enemy follower on the field. If you have at least 10 Shadow Paladins in the cemetery, destroy it. And Fanfare, give your leader 3 defense, and then mill top 2 cards of your cemetery. I've seen some decks run this, some don't, so it's kind of mixed. 5 costs seems a little expensive for it, but I guess I haven't seen it be like a non-zero chance used card. Might be just kind of how what you need, if you need more mill or not, or if you're kind of getting burst down quick. Maybe this would be good for like aggro decks with the heal 3. It certainly also could be, I could see used in Necrocharge. But the start of the end phase effect you might not get, but I guess it also depends on how many Shadow Paladins you want to run in a Necrocharge deck. If it's kind of more like 50-50, you might be able to get it to trigger a few times. But for a pure Necrocharge based deck, I could certainly see the mill 2 and heal 3 just at least being good, and a 5/5 is pretty solid as well. Up next is Darkness Maiden Matcha. She's a 3-cost 3/3 that you can ride for 1, and on drive she gets +1/+1, and you can search your deck for a Shadow Paladin follower that costs 2 or less and put it onto the field. One thing to know is, you're probably going to want to go for a 2-cost follower that does not have ride, because, you're going to be summoning it and then it's not really going to have any effect that turn. So you kind of want the 2-cost followers that actually have effects on, Fanfare, or at least just like an act ability. So that's why I kind of listed Abyss Healer, Abyss Freezer, Grim Reaper, and Blaster Javelin. And Knight of Nullity Masquerade, which we haven't seen yet, but we'll see that soon. So overall, just a good consistency card for Shadow Paladins. And yeah, pretty much I've seen it run at 3 of in every deck. Apparently, Knight of Nullity Masquerade was the next card. He's a 2-cost 2/2 that if you have at least 10 Shadow Paladins in the cemetery, he has Rush and Bane. And on strike, if there is a card with Blaster in his name in your cemetery, you deal 2 damage to each enemy leader. And on Fanfare, you put the top card of your deck into your cemetery. So the Blaster is relevant in a few cards because the kind of top end main card has the word Blaster in it. So I've seen people run this card as like a 1 or 2 of at max. I've never seen it at 3. But even then, it's not like it's been in every single deck I've seen. So it's not even like it's a mandatory card, but it's not a bad card. It's kind of in that weird spot where it's like it has enough effects that it's not bad, but it's also kind of like niche enough that it's just kind of okay. Skull Witch Nemain is the next follower. She's a 4-cost 3/3 that you can ride for 1, and on drive you give her +1/+1. You can check the top 3 cards of your deck, reveal 1 Shadow Paladin card from among them and add it to your hand, and then put the rest of the cemetery. And Fanfare, you can select enemy following field and deal 4. Really good, another good consistency card. I'd be hard pressed for you to not be able to just kind of play the deck pretty consistently every game. The one odd thing I noticed is there is a kind of like hybrid deck list with Shadow Paladins and Royal Paladins, because the Royal Paladins also have cards that say, if a card with blasters on the field get, X ability. In the case of those, I've seen people cut Skull Witch Nemain, which kind of makes sense because then you're kind of having more of a almost 50-50 split. I'd almost say it's more like 60-40 or maybe 70-30, but enough where Nemain might just get you 3 Royal Paladin cards. And so it's like, well, this, the on-drive effect's kind of pointless and not super consistent enough anymore. But if you're just running like your Shadow Paladins, I've seen her run it like 3 of in like almost every deck list. So still in general, a good card, but if you're running a hybrid build, just kind of keep that in mind that she's not really used. And up next is Blaster Dark. He's a 3-cost 3/3 that you can evolve for 1. And his base form has single drive, so it's basically the same as just like the drive of the other cards we've seen. But there is another effect called Twin Drive, which I'll get to soon. But he already has single drive on his own, even if he doesn't evolve. And on Fanfare, you mill the top 2 cards of your cemetery. And on Evolve, you select an enemy follower on the field and deal 3. But you also deal 1 more additional for every 5 Shadow Paladin cards in the cemetery. So he at least scales into the late game to deal more damage later on. He's just one of the core necessary cards for Shadow Paladin because he does everything you need. And this is one of the few cards in Vanguard, in Shadow Paladins as well, that evolve. Every clan has evolutions, but it tends to be like maybe 2 cards at most that evolve, maybe 3. I haven't really looked super hard at the other ones. But yeah, Blaster Dark, and there's 1 more card in Shadow Paladins that actually evolve. Everything else just has Ride. So most Evo decks will be 3 copies of Blaster Dark, 3 copies of the next card that will have evolve, and then just 4, drive point cards. So as I was mentioning ago, Phantom Blaster Dragon is the other card in Shadow Paladins that does evolve. He's a 3-cost 4/3 that, as an additional cost to play it, you have to sacrifice a Shadow Paladin follower on your field in order to even play it. You can evolve him for 1. However, if on Fanfare you do sacrifice a Blaster Dark to the cemetery to play Phantom Blaster Dragon, you can just evolve him without having to pay the 1 Evo point. And also, if he does get the Fanfare trigger to evolve, that does not count toward your once per Evo turn because it doesn't have the E, the golden E that the normal evolve does. He also has Storm and Twin Drive. Storm, being the usual effect of he basically doesn't have summoning sickness, so he can swing at whatever he wants. And then the Twin Drive is kind of one of the newer keywords too, but it's kind of just a additional step to the normal on drive, which Twin Drive just basically means check the top 2 cards of your deck when it swings, and if either triggers, you can trigger them. His on evolve is if you have at least 10 Shadow Paladins in the cemetery, you select an enemy follower on the field and destroy it. So, good board control. And he obviously gets the +1/+1 buff from evolving. So he's one of the more later end cards that you're looking for to hopefully close out the game. Last and certainly not least is Phantom Blaster Overlord. He's a 9-cost 6/6. But that is not a huge deal because when you play the card, if you have at least 15 Shadow Paladins in the cemetery, you can put a Phantom Blaster Dragon on the field into the cemetery and then play this for no additional cost. He has Ward and Twin Drive, so like the other one, you will check the top 2 cards when he swings. On Fanfare, you can select an enemy follower on the field and destroy it, and if you do, you draw 3 cards, so some good card redraw from all the spent cards you spent to even get to this point. He has a 1 play point act ability, which I'm not sure how often it'll work, but I suppose there's enough recursion in the deck that it will be feasible at some point. But if you pay 1 play point, you can discard another copy of himself to give him +6/+6, so he's a 12/12, so pretty crazy stats. But surprisingly, which is kind of the sad part of the card, is you would think it would have like Storm or Rush or something instead of only Ward. But yeah, no, that's it feels a little lacking in that regards. Also keep in mind that with the Fanfare, unless you have an enemy follower in the field you can destroy, you won't draw 3 cards. It's contingent upon being able to, select and destroy. But otherwise, he's kind of seems actually more like a defensive option, between the Ward and the +6/+6 stat boost. But I suppose Phantom Blaster Dragon is kind of the aggressive side, so this is the defensive side. So yeah, kind of, I feel like he should be like a super crazy card, but he just kind of comes off as okay. But you know, I'm certainly not opposed to, maybe I'm just not noticing something to have my mind changed. I wanted to go over some honorable mention cards. You got Majesty Lord Blaster, Stark Hall Trumpeter, Knight of Friendship K, and Knight of Loyalty Bedivere. None of these are like core cards if you wanted to run like a pure Shadow Paladin deck. But like I mentioned before, there is a little bit of like a hybrid where you can run some Royal Paladin cards that work well. So for an example, Majesty Lord Blaster, he has Storm for some more aggro. He does have an on strike of if you have a Blaster Blade and a Blaster Dark in the cemetery, he gets +2/+2. You know, another just blaster with the fanfare of, you know, if you have for each pair of Blaster Blade and Blaster Dark in the cemetery, you can select up to one enemy follower on the field and destroy it. So he has some synergy if you want to go the hybrid route, along with obviously Storm and Twin Drive. You got Stark Hall Trumpeter, which is a 4-cost 3/3 that you can ride for 1 to give it drive. And on drive, you select an enemy follower in the field, deal it 4, and give it +1/+1. And on fanfare, you can search your deck for up to 2 followers with Blaster in the name. So, you know, you probably want to grab a Majesty Lord Blaster and Blaster Dark to get the whole hybrid synergy going. But then you also have Knight of Friendship K, which is a 3-cost 4/3. That when you play the card, you flip a face-up follower with Blaster in his name and your Evo deck down, and he costs 3 less to play, and then he has Rush, so he helps you be able to Evo again one of the Blaster Darks if the kind of game goes long enough. And then you have Knight of Loyalty Bedivere, which pretty solid card. I actually might even just run this in my deck as the only non-Shadow Paladin. But it's a 2-cost 3/2 that has ward on fanfare. If you have a blaster on the field, he gets +1 attack and storm. So pretty good aggro there. So it's just all options that you can more or less add in whatever way you feel like, or don't at all. If you're just like, I am pure Shadow Paladin, and that's it. It's like, okay, totally fine. We got a few more honorable mentions that are not done yet. We got Luckbird. It's a 1-cost spell that says you can choose one of the following. You can either look at the top 3 cards of your deck and put any number of them on the top of your deck in any order, and then put the rest on the bottom in any order. Or the second ability, which is kind of more applicable for Shadow Paladins, is you can select 5 followers with triggers in your cemetery, put them into your deck, shuffle your deck, you draw a card, and then you recover a play point. So Luckbird is just literally free. The card is mainly more for the second effect of putting your triggers back into your deck, so you have better chance of hitting them with your drive checks, especially in Shadow Paladin because you mill so much. And really, as far as I can think of off the top of my head, I think the cap is 15 Shadow Paladins in Cemetery you need for the biggest effect. So anything more is technically overkill, and sometimes you might mill so much that you're almost dead. So you might actually want this to kind of refill your deck back up just a little bit. And you can actually, if your deck gets really low, you could effectively like stack your deck to however you want to a certain degree, even though you do have to shuffle, but at least you kind of know what triggers you're putting back in your deck. So, I could certainly see like decks running like 2 or 1 copy of this just to at least have it happen at least once in a game. And the last card is Intertwining Power. It does get printed as 2 separate arts. You have kind of like the monster, I guess, quote unquote, monster art. And then you have the like waifu art on the right side. But they're both literally the same card. Also, fun fact, there's like only 2 neutral cards in the whole set, Intertwining Power and the Drive Points. The Drive Points are technically neutral. So there's really not like any kind of like neutral archetype you can build in the game. But anyways, Intertwining Power is a 3-cost spell that you can choose one of the following. If there are at least 3 face-up drive points in your Evo deck, you can choose up to 3 instead. You can either select an enemy follower on the field and deal it 4. You can select a follower in your cemetery and add it back to your hand, or give your leader 4 defense. So certainly has some options. This card is kind of really good for any deck because I believe most decks are pretty much like 6 Evo copies and then 4 drive point cards. So, kind of more in the mid to late game, you're probably going to be able to hit this like relatively easily. But all 3 options are not bad, like on their own. Maybe a little expensive for 3 play points, but if push came to shove, it's certainly not terrible. So just want to throw it out there. I'm just doing my due diligence of, the only, few neutral cards that there are in the set. And that's pretty much it. Let me know what you guys are playing, or, you know, do you want to do the hybrid build, or do you want to just do pure Shadow Paladins? I'm probably just going to do pure Shadow Paladins because, you know, I just play Abysscraft. As far as I know, meta-wise, Shadow Paladins isn't like super crazy. I know Kagero is kind of the big deck to, you know, be meta. But, you know, hey, I'm an Abyss main. I'll just make an Abyss, you know, Shadow Paladin deck for fun. So let me know what you guys think, or if you have any questions or anything in the comments, and peace.